Okay, so you want to know more about the Eastern Orthodox Church worldwide, right? We're going to tackle that today.
Yeah.
We're going to pull out, I think, the coolest stuff from all this material that you've gathered
Yes.
about its presence all over the globe, its really long history,
Yeah.
and how it's doing right now
Absolutely.
without getting bogged down.
Right.
Too many details.
Yeah, this is a big, complex topic.
It is a big, complex topic.
We have a lot to cover.
This is your express lane to
Yeah.
really understanding this major branch of Christianity.
Yeah, what always amazes me is just how widespread Orthodoxy is.
Right.
And, going through these sources, you really get a sense of how this really ancient tradition hasn't just survived, but it's still thriving.
Right.
In a lot of different places, often, with the odds stacked against it.
Yeah.
So we're going to look at, I think, the key centers.
Yeah.
And some of the stories that give us a clear picture of what Orthodoxy looks like today.
Okay, so let's start with, I guess what you would call the headquarters.
Yeah.
The Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople.
Right.
Even though its power, on the ground isn't what it used to be.
Right.
It's still super important historically and spiritually.
So sure, for centuries, Constantinople was the heart
Right.
of the Eastern Roman Empire and, the main center for Eastern Christianity.
Right.
But when the Ottomans came in and then Turkey became a secular state,
Yeah.
the Patriarchate situation totally
Yeah.
changed.
Yeah.
And now it looks like they only have a few thousand Greek Orthodox Christians left in Turkey.
Wow.
Which is not a lot considering its history.
It's wild how things can change, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, its influence goes way beyond Turkey, doesn't it?
Oh, for sure.
I mean,
Yeah, it still oversees Crete and the Aegean Islands,
right?
which have these deep connections to Constantinople,
Mm-hmm.
going way back. And even more importantly, it's the spiritual home for the Greek diaspora.
Right.
All over Europe, the Americas, Australia,
Right.
these communities, they look to the ecumenical patriarch for leadership and guidance.
Right. So it's much more than just its little area.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. Then there's this place, Mount Athos in Greece.
Yes.
A monastic republic.
It's like frozen in time almost.
Right.
What's so fascinating is that it's completely autonomous.
Right.
And if you look at the details we have, there are 20 self-governing monasteries there.
Wow.
Most are Greek, but you also have Russian, Serbian, and Bulgarian ones too.
Wow.
Like the Great Lavra that dates all the way back to the 11th century.
Wow.
It's been a spiritual hub for Orthodox monasticism
Wow.
for over 1,000 years.
And you said that the number of monks there has changed quite a bit.
Oh yeah, there were over 7,000 in the early 1900s.
Wow.
And now it's down to around 1,500.
Wow.
It's a big drop.
That's a huge drop.
Yeah, and it seems like the communist regimes in Eastern Europe during the 20th century, they really put a damper on religious life.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of the monks came from historically.
Right.
But the cool thing is there's this spiritual revival happening in some places, like Saminopetra, Dionysiu, and Gregorio.
Yeah.
So even though the overall numbers are down, the spiritual energy in some areas is really strong.
And there's some pretty influential people who came from there too, right? Like
Oh, yeah.
St. Silouan and Elder Joseph the Hesychast.
Yeah, they really shaped modern Athonite spirituality.
Right.
And they emphasize things like inner stillness and prayer of the heart. Their teachings are still relevant to both monks and regular believers.
Okay, so moving a little bit north, we have the Autonomous Church of Finland. It has this interesting connection to Russia and then to Constantinople.
It's really interesting how politics shaped their affiliations.
Right.
They were evangelized by monks from Valam Monastery way back in the 14th century. And for centuries, they were under the Russian Orthodox Church. But after Finland got its independence in 1917, the Finnish Orthodox Church switched to the Ecumenical Patriarchate in 1923.
Okay.
And even now, in a country that's mostly Lutheran,
Right.
there are still around 66,000 Orthodox faithful.
Wow.
Who keep both Slavic and Byzantine traditions alive.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it really shows you how strong religious and cultural identity can be.
Yeah, that they would hold on to that. All right, so let's talk about the ancient patriarchates.
Okay.
Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem.
Yeah,
These were like the foundation of early Christianity.
absolutely.
But their stories since then have been pretty different, haven't they?
They really have.
Yeah.
So let's start with Alexandria.
Okay.
It was a major intellectual center
Right.
in the early church. But as you can see in your sources, it was really weakened by the Monophysite schism in 451 AD.
Okay.
This is a huge disagreement about the nature of Christ,
Hmm.
whether he had one divine nature or two divine and human. But what's really cool is that Orthodoxy is making a comeback in Africa under the Alexandrian Patriarchate, especially in Kenya and Uganda.
Okay.
The sources show a crazy growth
Yeah.
of about 300,000 African converts.
Wow.
And it's all through local efforts. No big missionary campaigns from other places.
So they're coming to it on their own?
Yeah, exactly. I think you think about how faith resonates differently in different cultures.
That's fascinating.
It is.
Okay. Then there's the Patriarchate of Antioch, which is now based in Damascus.
Right.
It seems to have a very different story.
It does. What makes Antioch stand out is its Arab identity.
Okay.
They serve about 500,000 people in Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, as well as the big diaspora in America.
Right.
Their liturgical language is Arabic, and most of the clergy are Arab.
Okay.
This is pretty different from some of the other ancient patriarchates,
Right.
where Greek influence has been stronger historically.
Right. And it's pretty amazing they're still going, considering everything that's happened in the Middle East.
Yeah, it really is.
So then we come to Jerusalem,
Yeah.
the guardian of Christianity's most holy sites.
Basic.
It may be smaller in terms of numbers, only around 60,000 faithful,
Right.
but it's super important spiritually.
Oh, absolutely. Jerusalem is where Christ was crucified and resurrected. So it has huge symbolic importance for Christians everywhere.
Yeah.
And the sources mention this interesting thing,
Yeah.
where you have a traditionally Greek patriarch leading mostly Arab clergy and laity.
Yeah.
It just shows how complex the history and culture of that region is.
Right. Okay. So the information goes east and all across Europe,
Yeah.
looking at all these national Orthodox churches, each shaped by its own unique history and political situation.
Exactly.
Let's start with the biggest, the Russian Orthodox Church.
Okay.
Its story is like massive in scale.
Yeah.
And full of these huge ups and downs.
It is. It's hard to even imagine the numbers they had in the early 20th century.
Yeah.
Over 100 million faithful and tens of thousands of churches.
It's crazy.
But then the 1917 revolution happened.
Right.
And that brought in this brutal period of persecution,
Yeah.
which led to a massive decline in both clergy and active believers.
Yeah.
But even with all that loss, the Russian Orthodox Church today is still the largest Orthodox church in the world,
Wow.
with an estimated 30 million active members.
That's amazing.
It's a powerful example of how faith can endure even in the face of systematic oppression.
Yeah, that's incredible. Okay, moving south, we have the Serbian Orthodox Church,
Yeah.
which also has a history marked by struggle and survival.
The sources highlight how they gained their independence in the late 19th century and how they managed to survive through the Balkan Wars, both world wars and the communist era.
It's impressive.
It is. They're strong, not only in Serbia, but also in diaspora communities in places like America, Australia, and Canada.
Okay.
Their patriarch is in Belgrade,
Okay.
which shows the strong link between national identity and religious faith.
Yeah. Okay, then there's the Church of Greece,
Yeah.
which I guess is connected more directly to how the modern Greek state developed.
Exactly. They declared their self-governing status, or autocephaly,
Right.
meaning they have their own head bishop and govern themselves
Right.
during the Greek War of Independence. And this was officially recognized later in the 19th century.
Okay.
As Greece grew, the Church of Greece grew with it.
Okay.
And it's now the third largest Orthodox church in the world.
Wow.
It's governed by its Holy Synod and the Archbishop in Athens.
Okay.
Its close ties to Greek national identity
Yeah.
have been a big part of its history and growth.
Now, the information you have also talks about some more complicated situations.
It does.
Like the Orthodox Church of the Czech lands and Slovakia. It seems like not everyone agrees that it should be autocephalous.
Yeah. What makes this church different is that it's mostly made up of former uniates.
Okay, and what are uniates?
So these are Christians who were in communion with Rome,
Ugh.
but were brought into the Orthodox Church under communist rule.
Oh, okay.
Interestingly, during the liberalization period in 1968, a lot of these people went back to Roman Catholicism.
Oh, wow.
Which shows how fluid religious affiliation can be
Yeah.
when politics change.
Right.
And to make things even more complicated.
Right.
The Russian Church granted them autocephaly, but the Ecumenical Patriarchate doesn't recognize it.
So there's some disagreement there.
Yeah, there is.
Okay, the Georgian Orthodox Church has a really long history going back to the 4th century, but it's also faced some serious challenges in the 20th century.
Oh, yeah. It was founded by St. Nina in the 4th century.
Wow.
And it became autocephalous pretty early on.
Okay.
But later it was absorbed by the Russian Church and then regained its independence after the Russian Revolution. The communist period was brutal for them.
Yeah.
They ended up with very few churches and priests for a large population.
So it's pretty amazing that it still exists.
It is. It's now led by the Catholicos Patriarch of all Georgia. And that shows how deeply rooted it is in Georgian culture.
Right.
And how resilient it is.
Okay. Then there's the Bulgarian Orthodox Church.
Yeah.
They also had to deal with political influence, but it seems like their experience under communism was different from Russia's.
Yeah, the sources suggest that the persecution was milder.
Okay.
And they've managed to keep religious life relatively active.
Okay.
But they are seeing a decline in monastic vocations.
Yeah.
Which is a problem for many religions around the world these days.
Right.
Their journey to autocephaly was also interesting. They declared themselves and then had to wait a long time for formal recognition.
Okay. The Church of Cyprus has this fascinating historical link to political leadership.
It does. It's been independent since the Council of Ephesus in 431 AD, which makes it one of the oldest self-governing churches.
Okay.
What's really remarkable is that after Cyprus gained independence from Turkish rule in 1878, the church's leader was also the political leader.
Oh, wow.
For example, Archbishop Makarios became the president of Cyprus.
So he was both the religious leader and the political leader.
Yes, exactly. This blending of religious and political authority is a unique part of their history.
Okay, so we talked about how bad the Russian Orthodox Church had it, but the Albanian Orthodox Church probably faced the worst suppression under communism.
It's true. This state actually declared that religion was dead.
Wow.
So it's incredible that they're still around.
It really is. They held on through centuries under Ottoman rule.
Right.
And then this attempt to completely wipe out religious practice.
Yes, they declared their autocephaly in the early 20th century.
Okay.
And they're slowly rebuilding, but it's tough.
Yeah.
The fact that the primate seat in Tirana is still vacant shows you how much they're still struggling.
Yeah, okay, so like the Czech and Slovak churches.
Yeah.
The Polish Orthodox Church also has an autocephalous status that Constantinople doesn't recognize.
Right. It's another example of how complicated things can be within the Orthodox world.
Yeah.
Most of their members are Orthodox Christians from Western Belarus.
Okay.
And they're based in Warsaw, led by a metropolitan.
Okay.
And, of course, they're operating in a place where Roman Catholicism is dominant.
Right, so it's a unique situation for them.
Definitely.
Okay, now this one is interesting.
Fair.
The Church of Sinai.
Yeah.
A whole autonomous church made up of just one monastery.
It is St. Catherine's Monastery at Mount Sinai. It's one of the oldest Christian monasteries in the world that's still operating.
Wow.
Their archbishop is elected by the monks.
Okay.
But he's consecrated by the Patriarch of Alexandria.
Okay.
And he actually lives in Cairo.
Huh.
So you can see the special connection between this ancient monastic community and the Patriarchate of Alexandria.
Okay.
The sources say that the monastic community itself is pretty small and getting older, which obviously makes things difficult for the future.
Yeah, I can imagine. Okay, so the Orthodox Church in Japan is proof that Orthodoxy spread all over the world.
Yeah.
In more recent times.
Yeah, it was started by a Russian missionary in the 19th century.
Okay.
St. Nicholas of Japan. His missionary work had a huge impact.
Yeah.
And it led to the creation of about 40 parishes.
Okay.
And a significant community of believers.
And they're autonomous now, right?
Yeah, the Russian Church granted them autonomy in 1970.
Okay.
So now they're a self-governing church within the wider Orthodox family.
Okay, so finally we have the Romanian Orthodox Church.
Yeah.
Which I guess, according to your information, is the second largest in the Orthodox world.
That's right. They got official recognition of their autocephaly in the late 19th century.
Okay.
And then they were elevated to a patriarchate in the early 20th century. They did face restrictions under the communist regime, but it seems like the persecution wasn't as bad as in Russia.
Okay.
So they've stayed pretty strong.
Yeah.
The patriarch is in Bucharest.
Okay.
And he leads a big chunk of the global Orthodox population.
So I think this deep dive has shown us just how diverse and resilient the Eastern Orthodox Church is worldwide.
Yeah.
From, Constantinople with all its history to the spiritual haven of Mount Athos.
Yeah.
And then you have this amazing growth in Africa.
Yeah, they're incredible.
And the unwavering faith we saw in Eastern Europe in the face of such harsh oppression. It's an amazing story.
It really is. And what I find really interesting is how each of these churches, while sharing the same basic beliefs and practices, has been shaped so differently by its own history, culture, and political situation.
Right.
The growth in Africa, like you mentioned, is a stark contrast to the struggles faced by churches in traditionally Orthodox areas.
Right.
And Mount Athos, being this self-governing monastic republic, is just unlike anything else in Christianity.
Yeah, it really shows that this ancient tradition is still alive and kicking, even with all these different challenges.
For sure.
So we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah, we have.
And I think we've given you a good overview of this global faith, just like you wanted.
I hope so.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with something to think about.
Okay.
Given all the differences in history and current situation among these Orthodox churches, what do you think is the main thing that holds them together?
That's a good question.
Despite all the geographic and cultural differences, is it tradition, a shared faith?
Right.
Or maybe their intertwined history?
It's definitely something to ponder.
It is. Yeah, it's food for thought.
Yeah, food for thought.
Okay, great.
Okay.
That's all for today.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.